let's pull the microphone actually in front of me so that you can hear me. You know, that kind of thing. That's what professional people do, right? Hi, everybody. It's good to see you. Good to be here on a Wednesday this time around. For those of you who didn't catch, and I'm just gonna fix this because that's. There we go. For those of you who didn't catch the reasons why I can't stream tomorrow, but there's just too much stuff to discuss. Thank you, Luke. There's just too much stuff to discuss to leave it for a week. So I didn't want to risk that we wouldn't be able to get around to doing a Clinic Hours this week. So Clinic Hours is today. We will do a scrub check hopefully later on. If we have to miss a week, we'll miss a week. I'd rather not, but glad to see people here. All right. I'm also going to remind people that while I am not worried about being spoiled about Mass Effect, there are people who are watching Mass Effect over on Elizabeth's channel, and as a result, I would ask no spoilers for Mass Effect at this time. Hey, Kaylin. It's good to see you. Good games, I suppose I should say, as well. Our respective cities were recently locked in a certain amount of, I won't say necessarily animosity, but that's what hockey will do to a whole bunch of Canadians. Bonjour Requiem, comment ça va? J'espère que ça va bien. Was it Bloodsport? Not necessarily. My audio was destroying as if peaking. I am not peaking. That's odd. It's true, Luke, but I also don't know how far they've necessarily got. So I, just giving it a little bit of a point there. You know what? I'll turn myself down here, see if that's better. Hopefully that's going to be better for people in terms of audio. Good. At any rate, I also ended up having to rush this because I ended up staying at work for longer than I needed to. Oh yeah, people can discuss things in spoiler tags all they want. It's just a function of not wanting to spoil people who are wanting to follow along with Elizabeth and Scott. Let's see here. Thank you, So Thanatos. That's very kind of you. All right. Now that I've got everything set up, what are we here to discuss today? Well, a couple of things. The first that I can say is we've had our drop for the rules and the storyteller section for Exalted Essence. So even if you're not necessarily huge on Essence, we are going to take a look at the rules as part of this manuscript. We're not going to go through the whole thing. There are, after all, many words in excess of, well, almost 40,000 words. So we're not going to be able to get through the whole thing after all. But we're going to go through them and we're going to have a look to see like how are these rules changing things and what it might mean for people who are choosing to play this game. What I like about what I've seen so far, obviously I can't give a full in-depth thing. I'm going to have to play the game to be able to make informed decisions about it. But that's more than 3 words. Pukajutsu, there's 1, 2, and there's more. So maybe it's exactly the same as 3. Hardness and soak is going to kill you. Well, okay. Well, look, we'll get into it. But we're actually going to start with the storyteller section first. And the reason we're starting with the storyteller section is because it's going to... First of all, I want to give people a chance to sort of filter in a little bit, but also because I think the storyteller section is really important when you're dealing with these kinds of things. So here, let me pull up my window capture here. We want to look at chapter 5. And hi, Gil Edgood. Understood. It's nice to see you. Hi. We'll hopefully be able to see you soon enough later on. So let's have a look. Boop. So once again, I've copied it into Word so that I can easily highlight some stuff. Finally, a storyteller chapter for 3rd edition. Kind of, sort of, but let's have a look. So also let's see if we can get the zoom in slightly so that we'll be able to see it a bit better. There we go. Okay, so one of the things that we have to remember is that Essence is designed to be a beginner product. It's designed for people who are not super familiar with role-playing, as well as people who are. It's not only for beginners, but it is designed to be more approachable than Exalted 3rd edition. And as a result, we are looking at a book that's probably going to need to have a dedicated storytelling chapter. In running through it, first things first, they talk about Session Zero. This is becoming more and more common when it comes to role-playing games. I'm glad to see it here. The idea that we want to talk about the genre, mood, and tone of a game is very important. Maybe also help those who are bozing around, possibly. And format. One of the things that I enjoy is that they actually discuss about how games are different depending on the kind of players you have, but also depending on the makeup of the group. Exalted is a game that isn't intended to be you need a certain number of characters with a certain spread of classes in order for it to work. It's more about who has managed to gather together in this time and what are they out to do. So the chapter is pretty good at covering that sort of thing, of making sure that it's understood. This was a concern that I brought up last week. Also, hello, Krister. Good to see you. Very good to see you. This was a concern that I brought up last week, that different Exalt types will lead to different kinds of games. And it's addressed here. The idea that there is making sure that overlap isn't necessarily bad, making sure that multiples of one Exalt type doesn't mean that people are copies. This is all good, but also the idea of maybe you should be restricting on character types or builds. Maybe what matters is whether you don't want to deal with a certain kind of exaltation or whether there's specific merits, charms, or artifacts. All of this stuff is great to remind new storytellers that it's important to be able to set your expectations and for your players to set their expectations as well. Also, in an interesting turn, they mentioned tabletop play. They mentioned voice and video play because that's becoming more popular. They actually mention actual plays. So essentially streaming or recording a game for an audience. And it goes into some very specific things, mentioning people who do favorite APs are often professionals, are often actors or broadcasters or comedians with professional sound and lighting, careful editing. It looks so polished because it is. This is fantastic for anybody to see because, to be very honest, it is one of the things that I've noticed lately in our community, in the role-playing community in general. There's a lot of worry that gets placed by people who are new, who have been brought in by such shows as Critical Role, and then worry that they can't possibly live up to the extremely high standards that those games set. It's not because they are high standards, it's because they are high production value. And you don't necessarily need good production value to have as good or better game than that. Mike Mercer effect is absolutely something to take into account. You do not have to be, it's Matt Mercer, but not Mike Mercer, but you do not necessarily have to be Matt Mercer to run an excellent game. They also mentioned play by post, which is kind of cool because there's the idea of chat programs, message boards. A lot of people play this, Exalted especially, which is an interesting thing for them to bring up. But then also they talk about during Session Zero, laying foundations down, finding out why they might be working together, discussing friction that might exist between characters. Players should decide up front how much they want things, rivalries and enmities to exist. All of these things are really good to mention, because these are all things that I think beginning players won't necessarily know to discuss right off the bat. Story hooks being in here, just throwing those in, decent. These are pretty basic. They do have examples of, hey, these are particular Exalted that you may want to have play in these things. So here's that. Matt Mercer invented D&D in 2015. Woof. Interesting. Now, basic. So this is going to be something that I have encountered throughout my career as a game designer and also as a performer, which is the expectations of your group depending on who they are. And one of the things that you'll find is that a product that is designed for beginners often does not appeal to experts, even though it doesn't take anything away from the experts. I'm not saying this is happening for you, Kung Fu Fenris, or anybody else, but these are very basic kind of examples of games that you may want to play. And people looking at basic stuff then start saying, well, this game has to therefore be basic, which is not the case. We have to remember that our experience doesn't necessarily reflect what's important for everyone to know. When you make a tutorial for a video game, you have to assume that some of your players will have played your game or games similar to it a lot, and some players will have never played a game before. And you kind of have to appeal to both. This chapter is very much appealing more towards the earlier, towards basics as opposed to expert things. And I imagine we may get some kickback, not kickback. We may get some pushback from people who were looking for something that was, but I want to play a complicated game of Exalted, but I also want streamlined rules. So this is doing a little bit better for that. It also mentions things like where is the game going to take place? Excellent. The idea of montages, excellent. The idea of living in an entire realm, a specific locale. This is all stuff that I think, again, very basic. The sort of people can move forward. What will challenge us? This is actually something that I haven't worked out the math yet. I haven't had time. But they're saying if your characters are these level of essences, it gives you a little bit of information on maybe what you can expect these characters to be able to handle. Things like characters with 4 hardness are the upper limit of what an essence 1 character can face. This is good because, again, this is not a game like D&D. The math isn't all done for you right away. So being able to go in here and get a guideline of what you might want to be able to do to challenge your players without wrecking them, this is stuff that I definitely want to see. It's also stuff that I feel was missing from the 3rd edition core to a certain degree. While there was some sort of idea of comparisons, this really does make a better situation here. Do you have access to the antagonist chapter, Mangani? But yeah, the idea that they're taking into account the idea of what sort of challenge will be required for these characters is great. And then essence, the idea of character's essence being a stat that sort of indicates their progression through the game, as pacing is good. Because I think that it's important that the storyteller actually gets to work with the players to determine when it's appropriate to sort of push people to that next level of play. It is all too easy, I think, to just say, well, you've played for 10 sessions, the book says that, so now you're Essence 2. This can often be a difficult situation to be in. Depending on the game, depending on your players. If your players are slow to catch on to the game, you may not want to advance them that quickly. If your players are combat oriented, but they haven't been playing a lot of combat in the past 10 sessions, to move them from a whole level of essence up without them even playing with the toys that they have might mean that they will advance too quickly, and therefore combat will become harder because there'll be more for them to sort of appreciate, more for them to focus. We don't have the charms chapter yet, so we can't necessarily get into that right away, but that's what we've got. What should we avoid? So this is the thing that I would kind of wish that they would that they'd be more explicit about. This is where they get into safety tools, lines and veils. I'd rather that they use a different heading than what should we avoid, because I think that this is very important for us to really focus in on and be like, safety is important. This is what we need. But that's a minor quibble. The fact that they discuss lines and veils is good, and comfort levels is good because it says things that I think are important to mention. It assumes that some degree of violence will happen. It also mentions see slavery in creation, right? Some folks might want to confront the horrors of the world. Some might not want to. This is something that we actually discussed ourselves when we were running Exalted. So seeing this in the chapter is an excellent thing to see. Yes, the storyteller may not be ready to give the character harder challenges. You're right, Requiem, for that specifically. So creating characters in the circle, this was something that I desperately wanted to see, and I'm really glad that it's there. Yes, and the game focusing that the storyteller is a player too is great. Playing a scally hard case, the shadow guy who broods in the corner can be fun, but without care it makes it difficult to play with others. The thing that I mean, I've said this before, the thing that I would enter in this is it's not just about alienating everyone in the game and the table. It's not just about checking in with the other players to see if they're comfortable with it, which is still very important. But the idea that if your character concept requires other people's emotional labor, that can be a difficult sell. And it specifically ends up being selfish. We don't want to play with somebody if interacting with their character is always a chore, but only on our end, because the other player is getting exactly what they want. So I'm glad that this is here. I'm glad that it's mentioned. I would have written it a little bit differently, but that's just me, and that's not anything to knock against this. I'm glad that they've mentioned this specifically in here. We're kind of going through this chapter pretty quickly because there's a lot to get through. So warm-up questions. This is just basically session 0 stuff, which is still useful to put. Examples are there, which is good. The first session, they make some suggestions about starting in media res, starting with a cutscene. Starting with a cutscene, be very fucking careful when you start with cutscenes, folks. People came to role-playing games to play. They do not come to role-playing games only to listen. It is unfortunate, but this is something that we do have to be reminded of from time to time, everybody, including myself. If your players are waiting to play and you are not giving them the chance to play because you are performing for them, you got to be careful, because you could lose your players very, very quickly if you've decided this. This is very common, I find, in certain LARPs, where a big event will happen and they'll call everybody in so that they can witness this big event. But then these people put on this sort of like miniature play for everybody to watch. And the thing is, you can keep people's interest for like 5 minutes, but they didn't show up for a 2-hour play. They showed up so that they could interact and make a change to the story themselves. Anytime your players can't talk, they can't change the story. So yeah. So cutscenes can be useful, absolutely, and they can be a really interesting way to do it. I'm just putting the warning out there because I've seen it happen a few too many times where cutscenes go on for too long and then players check out because they're ready to play. When to end a scene, this is good. This is just basic pacing stuff. When to end a session, look for a bow tie moment, event near the end of your session, either answering a big question or asking a new one. So this is them getting into the idea of cliffhangers or endings, which is good. Handing out milestones, but ask each player if they earned a personal milestone. Remember that milestones, because they have not errated it in the text yet, but they've made it clear that XP is supposed to be constant between all players. This is good. So I'm happy. Yeah, they still want you to buy the books, and I think that's totally fair. Requiem is right. Video games that start with a 15-minute cutscene before the game starts is not great. So what we're discussing at this point now in game design, we call that the FTUE or the FTUE, the first time user experience. When somebody sits down to a game for the first time, what is their experience like if they've never played before? And this can be a video game, but it can also be a role-playing game as well. And the first-time user experience for role-playing games often involves reading the book. But how much of the book do you have to read? How much do you really have to enjoy it? Is it enjoyable to read, or is it just a whole lot of charts? When you sit down to play for the first time, when you're making characters, is creating a character very quick? Is creating a character fun? Is creating a character going to take you 4 hours, and throughout most of that time it's mostly random and you might end up with a character you don't want? All of these things are things to keep in mind. We do not want a bad first time user experience, and generally that also means getting to the game as quickly as you can while preparing the player for what they're about to encounter. The pilot episode rule. This is great. If the player isn't thrilled with how their skills or charm selections panned out, allow them to rearrange their character sheet for the next session. In extreme situations, if one or more characters aren't gelling with each other or the game's mood and tone, allow players to recast their characters and create new ones. Thankfully, Essence is not so complicated. The player can swap out charms without using or arrange their stats at any time. If you're on your second or 22nd section and someone isn't happy with charm or artifact or point spread, it won't hurt to let them adjust it. I love that this got put in there. I tend to use 3 sessions to allow unlimited stuff before I sort of lock in. But it is true that if anybody came up to me and said, look, this really isn't working the way that I'd hoped, I don't have a problem with them changing it. I give people deadlines because I want them to commit and then move forward. Sometimes if you leave things open and too wide open, people get choice paralysis. So being able to lock things down can be useful, but I'm glad that they're making it explicit here. The idea that you can enjoy playing and that if something isn't working out, you're not punished for a decision that you made when perhaps you weren't as well informed as you are now. Also, Weirdness, it's great to see you. Choice paralysis sucks, and a lot of people suffer from it, including myself. This is part of the reason why I have difficulty sometimes with open adventures in video games. I start worrying whether I should be completing side quests or doing the main quest. Is my time going to be lessened if I don't 100% this game? Sometimes I want boundaries, so it's good to have boundaries at times. There's also a difference if they're asking about the charm they use every week versus the charm they bought in the 20th session, or the charm they bought at session 1 or session 0 and never used, and they realized 20 sessions later that it's just never come up. An example, Exalted is actually full of these examples, 3rd edition specifically. Can't say about Essence right now, but things like if you buy charms to strengthen yourself against the shaping influence of the wild, or if you buy charms to help you deal with the Restless Dead, and the wild or the Restless Dead never come up in your campaign, that can feel pretty bad that you've wasted a considerable portion of your power towards a section that's not coming up. Now, remember that a storyteller can look at a player's sheet and their sheet is telling you what they want to see and what they want to play, but you can't always accommodate everybody. Sometimes players will put something on there because they're like, I'm really interested in this and no one else is. And it's sometimes you just can't get around to it, especially if you can't get around it right away. Being gracious enough to let a player change their sheet in that respect because you've realized that they have sunk power into something that they will never use, I think is honestly kind of necessary for these sorts of things. The character creation chapter just gave you character concept spreads. I do like that too. There's a lot of charm bloat in Exalted 3rd edition. We'll see how it goes with Essence. So creating a campaign, bring tactile or visual materials to game. I think this should be made a suggestion. I don't think necessarily people need to bring in tactile or visual materials to make it work. It certainly is nice. It certainly is a lot of fun. Charm cards if players request them. I wonder whether that means we're getting charm cards. I hope we are, but I don't remember seeing anything official about that. Maybe somebody else in the chat can bring that up. But yeah, charm cards being a thing would be nice. Doodads for tracking motes, power, anima, and will, or what I recommend you do is find people who are awesome enough to send you beads that you can then use, because that's probably what we're going to do. We did get official ones for 3rd ed. We'll see. Some players do need visuals, but the trick that I don't like is the idea of telling a storyteller, bring tactile or visual materials to game, otherwise you're not doing it right. I know that's not what they're implying, but this is, again, the kind of thing where Matt Mercer literally has hours and hours and hours to prepare miniatures, not to mention the resources to be able to buy and paint and get these miniatures ready. Not everybody does. And not everybody has the time, not everybody has the resources, and not everybody has the inclination. Crafts are amazing, and honestly, there are times where I wish that I would spend more time working on crafts for games, but my problem is time. I just don't have a ton. I talk about those beads a lot because I really appreciate those beads. I think they're awesome. Put a limit on pregame talk. When everyone was announced they have 10 to 20 minutes to chat. See, this section I'm not as huge a fan with, because this is not presented as, here are some ideas. This is presented as like, okay, well, when people show up, they've got 10 or 20 minutes and then that's it. And then they got to start. They do say use an official gesture or ritual, turn on music, change the lights, begin the scene in a grand voice. This is the magic circle. We've spoken about this before on clinic hours. This is good. This is good advice, but I don't like this, 10 to 20 minutes to chat. That's the way it is. Not necessarily. You don't know. You don't know what's going on. The past year, I've done 20 hours a week of prep because I don't have a real job. See, like, that's great. I'm really glad that you get the chance to dive into that sort of thing, but I just don't have the 20 hours to spare. Beginning with handouts is a good way to keep everyone up to speed on the campaign's progress and set the tone for the impending session. See, this phrasing I like is a good way to keep everyone up. Like, that's good. This is a good idea is a lot better to me than saying this is what you should do. Write letters to their characters, describe visions from Luna. These are all good ideas. This is excellent. Antagonists act off camera. This is something that I wish people would kind of pay attention to. But I would say that my favorite sentence here is the idea that if you can't think of reasons why at least a few members of your circle should care about an antagonist's actions, change your antagonist until they do care. This makes a lot of sense to me. Just because you think that somebody's a bad person doesn't mean that they will, or even bad is a relative term. Maybe it's not about good versus evil in your game, but forcing an antagonist because you've decided is not useful. Having an antagonist get in on this is get into a thing is important that the characters kind of react well to them. And if they don't, you can remove them or change them, but forcing it through is railroading, and that's no good. So antagonists being here, I mean, it works. All of this works. No issues. Consequences and callbacks. Yep. Consequences are good. Callbacks are good. Letting characters act is most of the work. This is kind of important, but I feel like it misses one of the main points that I would put in a thing of this with this heading, which is very specifically the game is about the players doing things. Let them do things. But at any rate, players likely advance in essence with every other session with fast advancement, every 3 sessions with typical, and every 4 with slow. What? Does that mean that... Wait a second. Okay. I guess part of the issue is that I don't necessarily know whether they're referring to essences in the game or essences in the power. It must be a versioning error. Okay, great. Meant to be story. Thank fuck. Oh, fuck. That would be... I would just be like, okay, well then in 20 sessions you've hit, with slow advancement, every 20 sessions you hit Essence 6. So handy that we have that there. Yeah, that would literally mean that they would be Essence 6 at this point. Circle gets a certain amount of downtime when they reach their next Essence rating to represent learning the new power. But I like how they say that there's a few ways you can choose to handle this in your story. Suddenly having more friends or being better at close combat is the least believable thing they will do all day. Yep. I like that you can make it realistic, or you can make it that you just don't care, and both of them works. I think that is excellent. So, ending a campaign. When your players are making noise about another kind of game to play, when the theme of the game is approaching its answer, this is the better option. When your players are beginning to make noise about another kind of game, this is also a very important option. I would also tell people that unfortunately, sometimes as storyteller, you have to be the unpopular one and push for an ending when no one else wants one. Part of this is because, as I've said in the past, you are much better off. Always shoot to have a complete story, right? Like, don't end it randomly because you feel like it. But it is all too tempting to just run a game as long as you can and then we can keep it going. I can add more stuff. I can add new challenges. People will prefer a game that has a great story from beginning to end than a game that starts really great. Here, I'll go this way. Starts really great. And it gets better and better and better and better and better. And then it kind of coasts and peaks and then starts going downhill and downhill and downhill and downhill and downhill. And then finally it ends down here, when you could have done a game that ends at the peak or close to the peak. You can, like a denouement is fine. That was much shorter. You want higher average of player engagement as opposed to length of player engagement. Time to fight the reborn devil stars. What's that? Who cares? Yeah. So when people say I'd rather a game that just ends with a complete story instead of trying to push itself, that's what a lot of people claim. It's not necessarily what people actually ask for in practice. The idea of saying let's have a great self-contained thing, people love it. People say this about television all the time. It's one of the main criticisms of long-running shows like The Simpsons. It's gone on for so long, its overall quality sucks now. Of course, the reality is that The Simpsons is still a decent television show, otherwise no one would watch it. The answer is this: it was more popular at the beginning and perhaps had its best years early on, and so people are constantly comparing it to how it was early on. And I don't think you want that for your game, where people are like, well, this is fine, but it's better. It was better when it was like episodes 10 through 20 as opposed to episodes 150 through 190. And you'll often get people say like, well, when a show ends and it's the perfect length, like that's great. Breaking Bad or The Wire or these various things. But I'll also point out that a lot of people like something because it ended early and they didn't get to see it kind of continue and move on. I will be that person. I will be controversial, and I will say that the reason why Firefly is so fondly remembered is because it ended abruptly and early, and it didn't have the chance to play itself out. It's possible that Firefly would have been amazing for like 9 seasons, and everyone would have been thrilled with it. Or it's possible that it would have petered out season 2. The point is that we don't know. People got one season that they really loved. I mean, it also helped that it got kind of a cult following. But it's when people say that people are calling for Firefly to come back like right now. The reality is that also its time has passed, right? This is something that you'll run into with sessions where you might play every day or every week for a year, and then you have to stop for 5 years, and then like people say, well, can we pick that game up again? Things have changed. Players have changed. We forget details. We change our tastes in games. These are not easy things to overcome. So ending a campaign is difficult, but in general, players, while they claim that they want full stories, often are like, but I want to keep going. They don't feel like they want to stop because they're enjoying playing their characters. If you're doing your job right, they're like, but I'm having a great time. Why would I want to stop having a great time? That great time will end. Do you want to end it on a high note or do you want to end it on a low note? Find a great story to wrap it all up. That's the best way that you can end something. If everybody feels great, but everybody feels that the story is complete. So, at any rate, but of course, the problem is that maybe if you had gone on longer, it would have been amazing. It's a matter of risk. Sometimes it's worth taking the risk, and sometimes it's not. Firefly might have been amazing season 9, but we don't know, and we'll never know. So, and I'm also, as much as I've sometimes been that person, I'm not really going to comment specifically on Whedon himself as a creator at this juncture. I'm just using it as an example because it's the kind of the most popular modern example for these sorts of things. The chapter also goes into things like single exalt type stories versus what I assume is coming up next, mixed group stories. So saying that it's intentionally designed to support mixed group games is great to see, but I'm also glad that it's very explicit about special themes and abilities. This is what we discussed earlier. Let's get, I'm really pleased that we see this. The idea that we have to balance the fact that different characters, different exalt types may have different motivations and different ideas. So mixing them up in one group can be really interesting, but it also brings its own challenges. Yes, and I'm also glad that they're good for getting an overview. So some of these things, obviously, I'm hoping I didn't kind of following are some themes, genres, and plot hooks for each of the exalt types, which is good because you don't have to run a solar campaign exactly like this. Remember that your game is your game and you can do whatever you want. Storyteller sections are often difficult for that sort of thing because you want to make sure that you give people great examples, great ideas, but you don't want to lock them in. So all of this is good. Mixed group stories is good, and that's the end of the storytelling chapter. So I, all in all, pretty pleased with how that went. I'm actually pretty fine with the storytelling chapter here. My criticisms are pretty minor for it. I think it does a good job, and I'm looking forward to seeing the final manuscript for it because there will be, of course, changes and versions and editing and all of that. It is worth mentioning these are manuscripts. These are not intended to be final products. As much as I know that my group is currently figuring out whether we're going to be able to shift over to Essence and whether we'll enjoy that, I will also point out that this is not meant to be a final product. It will be messy. There will be elements that you'll find that won't work. There will be edge cases that aren't accounted for. That's what you signed up for. You got a manuscript. You'll have to wait until you can get the final product. So, most of my criticism about wording, well, some of it is about wording. Some of it is that I would prefer that they be more explicit about safety as opposed to just being like, what don't we talk about? Like, I want a very deliberate introduction to safety. I'd also want the red rule specifically mentioned at the same time as lines and veils. I think that's important that they get put into the same place. And I feel like there's certain things that I would have expanded upon, certain things that I might have glossed over. But overall, a lot of it is just wording. So nothing too bad. And do I have a massive splinter in my finger? Hopefully not. At any rate. I don't know what it is means, Kung Fu Fenris. I'm afraid. What's going on? I don't know what people are reacting to. I don't know what I've blipped out and I've lost the thread of chat. Yeah, red rule is, let me see if I can find it here. Red rule is mentioned in the rules section. I think it should be mentioned alongside lines and veils in session 0 because I think it's the sort of thing you want to present to players right away. This is also the sort of thing that safety has to be very explicitly stated, and I would prefer that it even gets referenced in more than one place. It's that important. So, but the red rule is still there. We'll get to that. All right, core rules. It contains everything a storyteller needs to know when running a game, and it is 30,000 rule stuff. Red rule is romance and stuff. So, okay, you know what? We'll start with this. We'll go for the red rule. It's important. So, the red rule. Let's zoom in so that people can read this properly. A player-controlled character can only be seduced or otherwise put in a sexual situation if the player is okay with it. Otherwise, such an attempt fails immediately. This is completely up to the player's discretion. Only they can decide if they want their character to be seduced, and applies on an attempt-by-attempt basis. Allowing it once doesn't void your ability to deny an attempt in the same scene or even by the same character. If no one in your group chooses to invoke this rule, that's fine too. The players don't have to watch their character put into a sexual situation if they aren't comfortable with it. Groups that feel comfortable doing so should allow player characters the full range of their seductive prowess when intended with storyteller-controlled characters, but remember the storyteller is also a player, and actions should also respect her boundaries. So this is a better stating of the red rule, I think, specifically because it says groups that feel comfortable doing so should allow player characters the full range, which I think is better than the original red rule, which is like player characters basically should be allowed to do this, but storytellers can object if they want. This makes it a bit more clear that like player characters should be able to use their powers if they have it, but bear in mind that it's only if you're comfortable doing so. So the red rule is incredibly important. Essentially, this is the consent. Hey, Game Mommy. It's good to see you. It's been a little bit. And hello, welcome Raiders. Shinny Raid. Good to see you. So yeah, red rule being the consent rule in role-playing games, and the idea that you don't have to put up with situations of a sexual nature for your character if you don't want to is totally great. This rule could equally be applied to violence. It could equally be applied to any kind of material that you might see in a game. The idea, though, is that in a lot of role-playing games, it's expected that violence will occur and that people are buying into it. But sexual situations tend to be a bit more of a question mark sometimes. So it is worth having a specific rule that deals with it. So it's good to be busy with work. It's absolutely good to be busy with work. So let's have a look at these systems. Let's see what they have to say and what's going on. Everyone needs a set of at least 10 10-sided dice. That's normal. Hey, thanks, Sugar Junkie. That's very kind. That's very kind for a lot of people. Thank you so much. There's a lot of smooching in Exalted, so it makes sense. That is very true. There is a ton of switching in Exalted if you want there to be. So, building the pool, this is the same stuff. 7, 8, 9 counts as one success. 10 appears as 2. Some special abilities may allow doubling of another number. Interesting that it doesn't specifically say that there are exceptions to double tens. So maybe double tens are just always in there. We'll see. It's great to see you, Sugar Junkie. I mean, I know that Wednesdays aren't typically when we do this anymore, but hey, I mean, maybe we should be bouncing around the days so that we can give different people the chance to join in. Water's good. All right. Action types. This is basic stuff. Flurries say that it has to be 2 different actions, and a character can only take 2 actions per turn. Good to know. This includes actions taken in response to things like counterattacks. Also good to know. So that keeps things simple. Multiple actions is one of the things that can really make nightmares for storytellers. Just ask anybody who had to deal with celerity when it comes to vampire, or rage when it comes to werewolf. Opposed actions. So sometimes ties happen, and they've basically come right out and said ties favor the defender. This is good to see. It sort of makes things clearer. Where the defender is unclear, favor the player characters over storyteller characters. If there's a tie between two player characters, the two players should work out how they think would be coolest for the action to resolve with mediation. All of this works out well. And of course, we already know that solars win ties. So that's a good thing to happen. Unstoppable force, immovable object. So this is specifically that if there's something that is flawless on both sides, then you make a repose roll. Makes sense. Not a big deal. Extended actions are ventures, and we'll get into ventures. I really do like what they did with adventures, but we'll move on to that later. Difficulty. So I really like this. Difficulties 1 and 2 are beneath the Exalted, and we're just not going to care about them. Fantastic. Oh, I'm cutting off. Oh, that's here. Let me, I didn't realize. Let's see if we can fix that. There we go. That should be a bit easier to people to see the whole thing. I really like the idea that it's just like, I was cutting off the text on the right side of the window. So I've just expanded the window, visible on screen. This is great, and I would absolutely want to implement this, because simple things for characters that are essentially demigods themselves and not dealing with them, yeah, I'm good. In corner case situations, you might call for one, which is good, but otherwise there's no need. All this is fine. So difficulty 3 is the base difficulty. I like that. Works. Difficulty 5 is challenging. 7 is, yep. And difficulty 10 most of the time will not be achievable without charms. It's kind of assumed, I would suppose, that Exalted will have access to charms that will help them out. Successes over the difficulty are called extra successes. That's good. May be important to obtain further information or result above meeting the base difficulty. Some charms grant additional effects. Makes sense. 2 dice average 1 success. That is absolutely true, because remember that zeros, you gain 2 successes. With that, storyteller can estimate the average difficulty a character can meet by having their pool and rounding down. This is all basics math stuff, which is handy. So success, failure, botches still exist. All of this is good. I do like they say, bear in mind the existing rules of failure. This should never prevent the story from progressing, and should never humiliate or embarrass the character. So I would say that should never humiliate or embarrass the player. Which often means not humiliating or embarrassing the character, but I do think that some players really like to see their characters fail, and some players really like to see their characters embarrassed. But this is a nitpick, because it's very easy for somebody to just be like, yeah, it's fine, you can put that in there if that's what you want. But I do like the fact that failure and botches are about showing when things go wrong, but not necessarily when things have to stop. The idea of narrative failure should never be a hard stop is important. This is something that I've seen a lot of beginner storytellers do. The idea that, oh, well, you failed, so you can't get in. But if all the rest of the stuff is inside, you just shut the entire thing down. And it's frustrating to then say, okay, well, now you have to find another way in. And then there's this whole rigmarole about doing that. Instead, a failure should be a way to change how the story is going right then to reflect some bad luck. So botches instead offer a hard choice, an entirely unexpected outcome, use up a resource, put the character in a difficult position. This is all stuff that I prefer to do. To me, a botch is a sign that something outside has happened that's either very bad luck or it triggers a twist in the story that players didn't expect. So sometimes I will use a botch to be like, well, the person who you're talking to arbitrarily, originally this is just going to be some random NPC that you meet. Now this person is going to be an antagonist somehow. Like, this is the sort of thing that you can use a botch for that isn't just your character does something monumentally stupid and looks like an idiot. A lot of people don't necessarily want to see that, and especially not all the time. Margins of success, we kind of know. Bonuses and penalties. So anything that impacts the dice pool is a bonus. So you can get dice bonuses or success bonuses. Makes sense. Same thing for negatives. Outside of charms, situation or event penalty does not exceed 3. Yep. Add bonuses, remove penalties. All this makes sense. When to assign bonuses, that's great. All of that's fine. The bonus dice from wearing fancy clothing, having a good idea, or appealing to a storyteller character's aesthetics feels good, might make the difference between success and failure. This is the kind of thing that you use penalties to indicate struggle for characters, but you can use bonuses also as carrots. A player's doing something that you like. I know that Exalted has a stunt system, and we will get to the stunting system later on, but if players are doing something that you like, make it more likely to succeed. Give them bonuses. Encourage them to do those sorts of things. It doesn't just have to be a stunt. Your player's like, well, I want my character to be dressed up in fine clothes, and they make a big deal about getting dressed up in fine clothes to go out because they want to put forward their best impressions, then you absolutely should give them bonuses if that added to the game. But if they spent 2 hours buying fancy clothes and it was boring for everybody, including yourself, and didn't really affect anything, first of all, you probably should have nudged them along anyway. But also, don't give them as high a bonus, or don't give them a bonus at all after like the first roll, so that you're not encouraging players to waste time just to get bonuses on future rolls. Some players will do anything, including making a game boring, if it means that they'll get a better chance of success. This is something to be avoided. Teamwork. This is how I've run teamwork. It's great. You know, have the players who are assisting roll their pools. Their successes get added as dice. If somebody is using teamwork, then it generally should indicate that this thing will be easier to succeed. It is also very possible for you to say that teamwork is impossible in a situation, and if they're abusing teamwork, this is not a hard thing for you to get around, either by refusing to allow it or by circumventing it, or even just talking to your players. So, what happened, Riot Gear Epsilon? What I'd love to hear about the kerfuffle. You had to remove the flanking roll in D&D because my players kept doing stupid things to get the advantage. Yeah, like there are times where it's where players will focus and tunnel vision onto one mechanic. Flanking is a common one, and the only thing that they care about in combat is, how do I flank? And sometimes after a while it's just like, this is counterintuitive or counterproductive, let's just play. So there are some misreadings here, I bet. There have been a lot of misreadings, and some of them are justified because this is, again, a manuscript. So I didn't seem to misread this, so if you want to let me know if there's something I'm missing here, let me know. So dice limit. These are some things that I like. Combination of bonuses can't exceed 10 extra dice added to the pool. I think this is good, because I think that the idea that you can just start, coming up with more and more excuses to be able to throw all those dice in is not great. I do kind of wish that that teamwork dice potentially, I recognize why they're not adding towards the dice limit, because then if you have enough teammates, then who needs charms? All you need is teammates, and then you can just succeed at anything anyway. So I guess I kind of understand that. Several people, including me, missed the difficulty of the teamwork roll. You don't just add half your successes, you add half your extra successes over the difficulty of 3. Yes. Yeah, that makes sense. But wait a minute. Hold on. So maybe I'm not reading this. This is Exalted Essence, which is a streamlined version of Exalted 3rd Edition, which is currently being kickstarted. It is player facing. So let me just see here. Let me read it. Sometimes the tasks you don't face alone. Players need to band together. Choose which ability you think is most appropriate to help with. Play with high physique. Yep. Makes sense. Characters must narratively be able to participate in teamwork, and the assisting action should make sense. Yes. Regardless of how you assist when making a teamwork roll your applicable pool. Any successes you achieve are added as a dice bonus to the assisted player's roll. So where's this 1/2? Or am I missing something? Or do I have a strange version here? That's what I'm curious about. This might be a versioning problem. At any rate, we're going to move on for now, and I'll see if I can get the answers here. I might be wrong. No need to apologize here. The dice limit. So again, 10 extra dice makes sense. If an effect would transform dice into successes, these count towards the success limit. Yep. 5 bonus successes. This limit on dice is separate from the limit on successes. You can get 10 bonus dice and 5 bonus successes, so that's good. Yeah, so this is something that I think they're going to have to deal with in versioning, Mungani. The idea that when you're rolling, you're always trying to get 3 successes, and that they're not just counting all successes that you have. It's always the successes that you have in excess of 3 or in excess of the difficulty. But I think that's a versioning issue. So, oh, you're mentally including the 1/2. Okay, that makes more sense. Okay. Penalties follow the same rule in reverse. Set a value to another value. That's fine. So I do like the fact that there are limits, because this also kind of prevents a lot of cheese. The idea that you just try to stack bonus upon bonus upon bonus upon bonus, and you can kind of say like, oh, you already got your 10 dice. That's the way it is. That's it. You're done. You can't go higher than that. So we live with it. We deal. Measuring time. This is just basic stuff. But I do like that we're tying things to narrative time as opposed to in-game time. These things make me happy. As you may have guessed, seeing as how I did manage to run the first season of Exalted Academy, having 2 weeks go by and yet 20 sessions. So there's that to pay attention to. So attributes. This is something that people have been, I've seen some frustration with, and I'm going to respond to it here. We've gone from having 9 attributes, so strength, dexterity, stamina, charisma, manipulation, appearance, perception, wits, intelligence, to having 3. Force, finesse, and fortitude. And there are people who are like, but what if I want to play somebody who's quick-witted, but not somebody who's quick-witted in body? And the answer is you can. You just don't have to choose finesse for every roll you make. If you know that you are not swift of body and you'd rather rely on strength for something, then you roll force, and even if it's a worse pool. I like the simplification here because this is a system specifically designed for simplification, while this doesn't go too heavy in on it. So this makes sense to me. I'm curious to see how I will react to it when we're playing, but I kind of like the idea that force is I'm going to be direct and go for it with power. Finesse being I'm going to see if I can dipsy doodle around it, and fortitude being I'm going to outlast it. I like this. I do think that the game is designed to be like, well, I'm going to use my best pools. I don't think a lot of people realize that that's what people do naturally anyway. If you are in a game and you get into a combat, people aren't going to be like, well, I'm always rolling dex melee because melee is my highest ability, so I'm always going to use melee. Sometimes I should be forced to use thrown, but I only have 1 in thrown. See, I I recognize that players will often take actions that are commensurate with their best abilities on their sheet, so this is not that much of a change. However, players still have the option, and storytellers absolutely also have the option, of forcing one of the other attributes to be used. Yes, the character is meant to be both attributes and abilities, and I agree with that as well. But if you say, I want to do, like, I'm going to try to resist the pain, so I'm using fortitude, and I'm like, the pain's going to be very sharp and doesn't last for very long, I might be able to say this is a better application of force instead. You are trying to just push right through pain or whatever. Pain's a bad example because pain's very specifically related to fortitude, but you can always justify something else if you need to. This is just basically saying, look, usually it's okay to let players roll their big pools, and I think that's fine. Let players feel good about what they've put on their character sheet. And then we get into the abilities. So we've really we downsized the ability list. Athletics, I'm really glad that they didn't make athletics the only thing instead of athletics and physique. It would have been too powerful. So they are still paying attention to being OP. Athletics is being used to calculate evasion. So dodge is now part of athletics. I am totally okay with this. Awareness is pretty important on its own. I've already made it clear that I don't like perception as a stat specifically because it's, to me, one of the most overpowered. Perception often ends up being the kind of tell me what to do next button. So I like the fact that perception isn't necessarily part of the game anymore, and we just rely on awareness for those things. And also, it is I will remind people that if you don't like the way that they've simplified things, Exalted 3rd Edition is right there for you, and it's a game that people really enjoy. You can play that instead. It'll be fine. You don't have to play a more simplified version. Simplified means easier to handle, easier to run, often faster. Simplified also means less realistic and less choice. That is not to say that less choice or less realistic is bad, but it is a trade-off. Elegant design can only do so much. You can't kind of have both. Fortitude seems to include the perception attribute in its function to a certain degree. Yeah, I would agree. I mean, they say vigilance specifically in fortitude, but I don't. The idea of perception and awareness. I mean, this game hasn't removed it entirely. I really liked the way that Chronicles of Darkness did it, where you instead rolled the relevant ability instead of an awareness ability, because I do think that awareness is just very overpowered. Hey, I'm setting up an ambush. Oh, well, I have high awareness. I have hidden something in this room. I have high awareness. It's too often kind of like the thing that a lot of people kind of go to for bonus. If I'm playing D&D and I'm trying to min-max, I absolutely will have perception as a trained skill every goddamn time. It is the skill that people are asked to roll the most. So there's that. You might be able to mix third and essence for NPCs, Pramster. I mean, obviously you can do whatever you want with your game, but we'll see as we continue. Close combat. So close combat is now melee, and it is martial arts, and it is brawl, and I think that is just fine. I recognize that it might make people feel a little less special, but I believe that that's going to be reflected in charms. I imagine that some charms will be great for fisticuffs and some charms will be great with weapons, and that's the way that you'll be able to express yourself along those lines. But it always felt a little strange to me that somebody would be like excellent with swords, and then you'd also have to invest. Because the thing that I like is that if you want to play somebody who's like, I'm really good at combat, I'm very versatile in combat, you would have to invest in thrown, brawl, melee, and archery in order to be good at all of those things. That's 4 abilities, whereas now it's 2. And I think that that's kind of the way to go. Because there are some people who are just like, yeah, I've studied a lot. I know a lot of different ways to fight. And I kind of like the fact that now you can do that. And then it's charms that dictate how you are specialized. Charms being the quote unquote abilities or magic that Exalted can use. Yeah, 5 or more if you want martial arts as well. Absolutely. So I like this. This makes a lot of sense. Craft. You go into ventures. I now believe that crafting is something that I can run in this game. As much as I wanted to like the craft system in 3rd edition, and as much as I recognized the problems they were trying to avoid with them, I do believe that the venture system will probably be much better for crafting. We'll see when we get to ventures. Embassy. So embassy is basically like your it's basically like your socialize, your presence mixed together, and I think that's fine. The name of the ability I think is a little bit awkward, but I don't have an immediate better choice, so but otherwise it's fine. Embassy also covers the character's ability to speak and read multiple languages. A player may declare they understand a number of languages equal to their embassy at the start of any campaign and may learn more and play through study or magic. Not tied to XP. Totally fucking fine with me. I like this. I think that it's great that you can kind of say, I have Embassy 4. I should be able to speak most major languages in creation. Yeah, great. There you go. I have Embassy 1. I can speak 2, maybe 3. But again, I prefer the language rule of your characters can understand everybody until it's important that they can't. And then I would say that if you have a high embassy, you're just more likely to understand the languages, so you'll encounter that less. Bureaucracy and linguistics socialized all mixed together. See, I like the idea of mixing bureaucracy and linguistics together because I think that bureaucracy is a really fascinating ability, but it's not very sexy. Mixing it in with linguistics and socialized means that more people might be tempted to go down the bureaucracy charm tree, assuming that that's how they're going to sort of put it there, that there will be charms more devoted towards bureaucracy and more charms devoted towards linguistics and the like. Integrity. Yep, makes sense. Increases the difficulty of social actions targeting you, called resolve. You may always use integrity to read intentions. The fact that integrity is now used to both protect yourself and used to read other people, I think is great, because I think integrity needed a boost. I think integrity is a really cool ability. I like to play characters sometimes that are that might not be the strongest or the fastest, but they will tough it out in the end. These are often quintessential protagonists. They often are not the strongest or the fastest, just the one with the most determination. People who play Undertale may be filled with determination. I shouldn't really make those jokes. I haven't really played through Undertale. But I do like the fact that integrity gets that boost. I think that's a very strong thing. So good on that. Navigate, combining ride and sail, I think is good. Again, ride, sail, both really interesting, but kind of niche, and also can potentially mess you up, because if you're not playing around the water, why do you have sail? So I think that works again. Kaylin, enjoy your run. I absolutely, today would be, freaking hot for me to go for a run outside, but I love you to do that. Yeah, it does seem to also incorporate some elements of survival, so that is great as well. So, hey, it's the Onyx Path. Ian, it is good to see you. I assume that it's Ian behind the name. We're having a look at the rules of Exalted Essence. So far, I am loving it. I mean, I read this before the stream, so I know what I'm talking about here. But I don't have the bot open here. I'll just reach over and do that. Third, it's the only real reason many people take points in integrity, was just to boost their resolve. So I agree, and I think that it makes resolve sexier to take, and I like making things sexy for people to take. Performance, this makes sense. So this involves artful expression. I like this because it's sort of, there's a niche of players who like to play like, I'm the best actor, dancer, singer, player, sculptor in the land, and I think that that's great, especially now that performance can be used to build power. Ian, I will be very honest with you. I think Essence is I love 3rd edition, and I think Essence is the edition that I would want to play over 3rd edition at this point, especially considering that when I'm playing Exalted, it's usually on stream, and stream kind of being able to lower that cognitive load on my brain to be able to continue the stream better would be a useful thing for us, especially because we also play in shorter bursts of 3-hour sessions as opposed to long things. But right now, yeah, Val was an Integrity Supernal. I loved Val for it. I just don't think that it's a very sexy ability for people to take in 3rd edition. And this helps because now Read Intentions is built into Integrity. But when we get to social influence, you'll see that this is something that I believe this system will be a lot better for storytellers to use social influence on characters, and we'll see when it comes up later on. Performance, great, no problem. It also interacts with prayer. So this is interesting because this very specifically mentions, hey, this is a world of animism. There is gods everywhere. Being able to interact with them is performance, I think, is great. It makes performance a little sexier. Again, anything that makes abilities a little sexier, fantastic. This is good game design. This is giving people a reason to look at every ability from both a character building and flavor context, but also a mechanics context. It might involve a couple of minor leaps in logic, but I think it's perfect for this. So great. Physique. This is what they split athletics. They split this off from athletics because it was just way too powerful. The idea of performing physical feats like lifting objects, toiling without stop. So this is resistance mixed in with a bit of athletics for like lifting things. I think this makes a lot of sense. Physique being able to help you resist poison and disease makes sense. Physical feats of strength makes sense. So I really like it. I love being the strong gal who lifts all the things and being super tough too. I think that this is a great ability. Aresta from Exalted Academy. Obviously, Physique would probably be a very important ability for her, seeing as how that sort of resistance, but also just the sheer like oomph of it makes a lot of sense to me there. Of course, I don't want to speak for Kate on her own character. She can damn well call things out herself. Presence. So we've seen this personal magnetism and persuasion on an individual level. So this is persuasion and personal magnetism. We've often used socialize for this. This is a slight change for this. Kate, we were talking about how physique is probably a big deal for Aresta because it's not only her ability to resist things, but also her ability to lift things and be strong. So the idea of presence versus socialize has always been a little bit kind of nebulous to me. Hopefully this will help break it down. The idea that it's specifically for persuading, I also tend to use presence as something if you are addressing a crowd, not oratory. So you're not like trying to just, sway them with your stories and the like, but specifically that if you are, trying to issue a request to a crowd, it's probably presence because it's more of a overall thing as opposed to a one-on-one, but we'll see. Ranged combat, we've already spoken about combat, but this makes a lot of sense. It's essentially your ability to aim and hit things from a distance. Great. Sagacity. I love the idea of sagacity. This is the combination of lore and occult and medicine. Medicine and lore. So medicine often doesn't need to be sexy because the healer concept is something that's quite popular among characters. So this also then encourages people to kind of dive into like, well, I have studied, and studied implies lore and implies occult. And I think that that's a good thing to do, because I think that occult often ended up being like, I would take occult if I really wanted to focus on casting, on spell casting, or if I just wanted to know about weird stuff. But then it's also like, but if you studied about the weird stuff, you probably know about other things as well. So Sega. So I do like the changes for sagacity itself. I do not like the idea that somebody can by followers, so you're banned. Every character I had with lore had medicine and lore at least one dot. Yeah. Weird stuff is my specialty. Absolutely weirdness. That's to be expected. So I do like the combination of sagacity here. It makes a lot of sense. It's prerequisite for learning sorcery as well as curing diseases. I don't remember whether you can still establish facts. We'll have to check that later. Stealth. Stealth is a very common ability. I don't see why you would need to throw it in with something else. Stealth may be used in place of presence or embassy during social interactions with criminals or criminal organizations. So that's an interesting tack on here. I don't know if I would have made that choice, but I don't really object to it. I think that's fine. I think it's fine. So war, the ability to command others as well as create battlefield strategies and understand their enemies. So this combines a little bit of presence and a little bit of war. I do think that that's interesting. It does change a little bit, for instance, for Gale Whispered, who is somebody who is great at strategy, but not necessarily at command. However, I don't think that's a huge problem because, again, you can probably specialize in an ability through charms. We'll see that when we get that in there. They combine larceny and stealth. Yes. Yeah, they did. My mistake. I forgot about that. So deciding what to roll, they specifically come out and say, use your best attribute. It's all good. I'm fine with this. And the storyteller should veto any suggestions that are a big stretch and free to dictate that certain roles must be based on a specific attribute. All of those make sense as well. I don't know why you'd call it a corner case. But I guess they're trying to discourage the idea that you have to force people to make weaker rolls. But anyway, I think you kind of have to keep stealth, Mangani, because stealth is one of those things that's very common among player archetypes. People wanting to play the ninja, the assassin, the thief. They look for stealth. It's a pretty common thing to look for. So I'm not surprised they kept that name instead. Although I think larceny is just a cooler word, and I think it's more encompassing. I'm not surprised they kept stealth. So stunting. So they've changed stunts. Let's have a look. We stay hydrated because we are talking a mile a minute. They want to play the terror that flaps in the night. Absolutely. Who doesn't want to play Darkwing Duck? So, staple of Exalted play, Essence rewards players for describing their action in a cool fashion. Any cool description is a stunt. There's no need to write flawless prose or perform perfect oratory in order to qualify for a stunt. Just put an interesting spin on how you describe it. I like that their examples for stunts are quick. They are one sentence. Anything more than just a declaration of intent counts as a stunt. Makes sense. When a player earns a stunt, they gain 2 dice that they may cash in immediately. At their choice, they may also hold on to these dice to apply to any other roll during the scene, theirs or another player. You may bank as many sets of stunt dice as you choose, but you may only benefit from 1 set of stunt dice at a time. So this can be helpful if you know that later on. Adventure or Aberrant would be great for Darkwing Duck. Absolutely. I love the fact that Adventure and Aberrant exists because I think they both fill great niches. This is interesting because then if you've stunted a whole bunch and you've kept them in reserve, it means that later on you don't have to focus on stunting anymore. You can kind of be like, okay, well, I'm just going to attack them, especially if you're kind of getting to that point in a scene where you just got to like move on. You've got your stunts banked, and that's helpful. And you can also give somebody stunt dice, which is helpful because then you can it's sort of a way for players to remind each other that they can stunt by being like, oh, here's my stunt dice, so that then they can use it later on. It can help with stunt fatigue. I do think that that's a valuable lesson. There are some people who can stunt every damn roll they do. There are some people who can't. And I think that it's good to appeal to both. But you can also use stunts in a different way. You can cash them in to restore resources, to restore a point of power or gain a point of will. Willpower isn't a stat, so we'll see what will matters later on. We've received word that restore a point of power means you had to have earned that point to begin with. You can't restore something you didn't have. Dramatic edit, so allow characters to slightly modify the scene, declare items or people who are not initially present, or shift the flow of action. So this is sort of like declaring a fact, but it's also, just straight up describing things. So this is a useful thing to do. This is basically saying you can use a stunt to describe something that you'd like to have around, and I think that's great. I don't see a problem with that. And it has the within reason clause, so that happens. Yeah, will is what you use to cast. I was trying to obscure that, Moncani. We were going to get to it later, but anyway. Instant training. So this is interesting. You can stunt to instantly learn a new charm, acquire a new merit within reason, and you can only benefit from once per session. But this means that now you can be like, I'm not spending my experience in case I decide that I need something right away. And I like that idea. I think it's neat that you just all of a sudden you burst forward to the next level of understanding, or you describe something really cool which manages to get you new merit. I think that that's great, because I do think that flexibility and spending experience can be fun. The only thing that I would point out about this, though, is that this can bog a game down. You don't have to delete any posts. It's fine. I was just kidding. I want to know more about the summary page, right? So it can bog a game down if someone's like, well, I stunted. Well, I want to see what charms I can get. And then they immediately pick up the book and they start looking through charms. So my recommendation is that if you want to do instant training, it's got to be instant. You got to know what charm you want to get when you use it. You can't kind of be like, hold up, folks. I got to spend the next 15 minutes to figure this out. It's the equivalent of calling timeout so that you can pump up your shoes. Yeah, Dragon Ball, not Dragon Blooded. That's very fair. And all stunt dice go away at the end of the session, so you use them or lose them. Fair. Yeah, please don't start looking up stuff mid-combat. So that is the thing that I would do. Instant training is the kind of thing that if you have an idea of what you might want to buy, but you aren't sure if you want it yet, at least you've already kind of done your research. The Reebok pumps of the 90s, Pramster. You're damn right. These were shoes that had air bladders in them, and that you could pump them. They typically was like a basketball, and you would pump them full of air so that the shoe would get tighter around your foot. It was not that useful, but it was a great kind of it was a great kind of thing that people were. It was fun. I never actually owned a pair. I really wanted them at one point, but there's a reason they don't make pump shoes anymore, or air bladder shoes, I should say. They still make pumps, but they're something else entirely. But if you know what kind of enemy you're going to be facing, the instant training could be very useful to learn a charm that would help in that encounter. That's what I think it's better for Requiem. Like if you're like, oh shit, we're encountering creatures of darkness. Well, I don't have any charms that can help me deal with creatures of darkness, and now I do. That would be a great example of using it. We'll see what happens when we get to charms, which will not be today because charms are not available. System terms. This is all stuff. We know what's going on here. Social influence. This is, I think, not having played it yet, is going to be amazing. And here's why. The social influence system still takes intimacies, which I think are a wonderful part of the game. They attach virtues. I know why they did it. I don't need virtues, but I will use them. Virtues are a little bit easier for like newer players to kind of wrap their head around, of like, instead of a defining intimacy. So I get it. But the thing that they did with it is they essentially made it so that now, instead of it being a long drawn out process with decision points and all of that, which could be really cool and really tactical, and I still think that system has its place, this makes social influence have like an instant effect that I really like. We'll get into it. So virtues are things, you have a major and you have a minor, and they kind of deal with how your character deals with the world. Your virtues cannot be fucked with. Your virtues are your own, and only you are allowed to change them, which I think works out well. Virtues, exalts are people who act in extremes, so that outside impetus, the character acts in line with their virtues. So this is basically like storytelling help. This is role-playing help for people who aren't as used to role-playing. That's what intimacies are as well. Like, hey, if you're not sure what to do, look at your intimacies and see what they can do for you. But I think that a lot of people will ignore some of these bits of advice if they don't need them, and I think that's totally fine. Intimacies now just have majors and minors, but they still have ties and principles. It's fine. You don't really need the granularity of major, minor, and defining. This kind of, I'm not sure about. Intimacies are tied to a character's virtues, and when describing an intimacy, the character must decide which virtue it falls under. It helps describe how the character relates to the intimacy and what she'll do to defend it. I don't know if I care about that much. It's fine. I'll try it. This part I don't think is necessary. But again, just because I don't necessarily like it doesn't mean that it's not good for beginner players. So I will give it a shot. I don't think that it hurts much, and I think that it's easily ignored if you need it. Gaining new intimacies. So you may gain new, change, or even remove intimacies as it makes sense for your characters in the story. We've also seen that it might be a time to do it when you deal with milestones. I think that basically people will change however their group is best. I like the idea that that groups can choose one way or the other, because I think that for some people, they might not think of intimacies unless you give them a reminder. And then you have Scott, who will have 3 8.5 by 11 sheets of paper with intimacies all over them within 3 sessions, and it's great. So intensities, minor, major. We've already gone over that. So influence actions. This is what I think makes it interesting. I'm going to sum up because it's a lot. First of all, resolve now kind of has a base of 2. If they have 1 dot in integrity, then it's 3. If they have higher integrity, then it's 4. So this is sort of like you have to read the book to be able to calculate it. It's not fantastic, but it's fine. A character's virtues and intimacies may adjust or resolve up or down. We already know this. When targeted by a social influence action, determine if any of your virtues and intimacies are relevant to the nature of the influence. If more than one virtue or more than one intimacy is relevant, choose the one from each category with the highest intensity. So the thing is, this still kind of plays into the idea of discovering somebody's intimacy means that you know where their weaknesses are. But now you can kind of make that sort of interpretation of like, if you want to, you can say you didn't necessarily mention this, but this would trigger this intimacy's sort of like condition of I matter here. So, incidentally, I use the word trigger here as like a game concept term, not as the, not as in like this action triggers a bad response in me, but I should apologize for that if somebody doesn't like my use of that term. It's just a game design term at that point. So they declare their intention for the influence. You form the dice pool using the appropriate attribute and ability. You determine if virtues, so the target determines if any virtues or intimacies adjust their resolve, which I like, but it means that you can adjust how you try to influence somebody based on their intimacies. If you're like, you have to go help me do this, they might on their own determine what an intimacy might come up with. But if you say, you have to help me do this in order to protect this person you love, it makes it more easy and more obvious for them to say, oh, I should apply that intimacy. So that works out well for me. But here's what I like. The following are influence actions a character may take against their target. In parentheses, this is the cost to buy the action with extra successes on another influence action. So what this means, if I understand, they're the rules for Exalted Essence, the Weary Warlord, which is a game that is currently being kickstarted, the streamlined rule version of Exalted 3rd edition. So I think there's some versioning questions in here. I think that what I've got is you can try a social influence action, and then if you get extra successes, you get to try extra things on them as well. Things like instilling or dissuading or persuading. So you can choose to add on stuff with these social influence roles. They are, I believe, like there's some versioning here, so I'm not going to get too far into it, although I like the fact that you can set up somebody else for better social influences. I do like that you can read intentions using integrity. But I also, there's a few things in here, like if integrity is what you use for read intentions, does that mean you can just tack on a read intentions with another roll? So we'll have to see what's going on here. But here's where I get to the part that I really, really like. If you're using social influence against somebody, and this can be an NPC or a PC, doesn't matter. You can choose to accept the influence. You just do it. It's fine. You can choose to, if the target's unwilling to go along with whatever they've been influenced to do, you can choose to accept a hard bargain, which is basically a negotiation to say, I don't want to do this, but I'll do this other thing instead, which I think is perfectly reasonable. I'm not going to drop my weapon, but I will accept that I'm distracted, so I won't attack in the first round, is an example that you can have, right? Like, I won't build power in the first round because I'm trying to steal my resolve to attack instead of just dropping my weapons right away. So the idea of a hard bargain being something that you can propose and then you can negotiate as, I'm not doing this, but I'm doing something else, I think that works really well. But you can also ignore something entirely. And this is great if you ignore social influence being used on you. That means that whoever successfully rolled against you gets bonuses depending on how well they were trying to persuade you on any other action in that scene. And that means that you can threaten somebody to say, like, back down, and they're like, I will not back down, and you're like, great, but then the first roll of combat I get to add 4 extra dice because I was very good at trying to get you to back down. This means that it's a lot easier now to use social influence against players, because oftentimes using social influence against players can feel like railroading. You say, this character is very charismatic and tells you what to do, and players are like, but I want to be the master of my own story. So it can be difficult to use influences against players. But now you can be like, this person's very charismatic, they give you this role, you can drive a hard bargain to choose something else, or you can be the badass and stand up to them, but that means that they get an advantage that they can use on a different kind of role later on. I think this is wonderful because it means, very simply, that you can go forward and try to use influence on player characters all they want, and they get to decide whether they want to accept it, hard bargain, or it still matters. And it's a relatively simple thing. It's one roll. You don't have to go into the decision points and discovering whether you have supporting influence intimacies to help you. I think this is elegant. The versioning of the social interactions and choosing these extra things is something that I would want to look into a little bit, but I do think that's great. And you still have unacceptable influence, like if it's so antithetical to you, it just bounces off you and it doesn't matter even before the roll. So like that's if you're trying to convince somebody to kill themselves, or if you're trying to ask them in a way that would require them to abandon their major virtue. Yep, makes sense. And here's the red rule, which we went over earlier, which also gets tied into that. So it's great. Honestly, it's a great rule, and I think that it's quite a valuable rule to use. Moving on, multiple targets for socials. That's fine. So combat's a big deal. Woof. We're not even halfway through this chapter, and we are only 25 minutes left, so we might have to roll some of this over. But for combat, so I love the fact that here, join battle makes sense to determine whether player characters or storytellers go first, and then it's literally just one, then the other, one, then the other, but storytellers can interrupt if it's important. So it kind of means that the storyteller can ignore initiative when they want, except for the very first action, which makes some sense. But it does make initiative a lot easier to deal with and track, and you just don't have to worry about it at that point. It's player characters, then storyteller characters. It's simple. It kind of keeps things going. Join battle is still appropriate because acting first is still definitely an advantage, but you no longer have to keep track. And also, you don't have to deal with the fact that people bounce up and down the initiative track all the time through withering attacks and decisive attacks as well in the original Exalted 3rd edition. So I do like this. Players choose who goes next. So what happens is whoever goes first then decides who acts next. Players can choose to go next after another character, but important storyteller characters may have the ability to jump in. So players may nominate storyteller characters to act next if this would be an interesting or tactical choice. But in general, the more times you get to act, the more times you have the chance to influence battles. So I imagine that will be a very tactical decision, equivalent to like, I'm going to delay my action to see what they do. So that ends up being more of a role-playing decision. But I do like that it just ends up being you go next, you go next, you go next, and players can kind of volunteer like, I'm ready to go next, in which case it works out. And whichever side acted first continues to act first for the duration of the combat. Keeps it simple. It's also known as Popcorn Initiative. I've seen that being used. So, flow of combat. So this is where it gets interesting. Withering and decisive attacks remain, but now you are building up a resource known as power. Once you get your power high enough, you can make decisive attacks with it. You kind of wager your power. So you can kind of build up your power and then go all out in one major attack. You can build up your power just enough to be able to hit and then try to, score somebody just slightly. It is a powerful way of doing this because it still has that whole withering, I'm trying to gain the upper hand, and that cinematic decisive, I'm going in for the final blow. But what's excellent here is that withering attacks are excellent, but you can also build power in other ways. You can build power by taking a non-combat action. And you can build power for another character by like inspiring them, commanding them. I really think this is powerful because it means that now you can have a way to be useful in combat, even if you are not a combat-focused character. You can be very useful in combat, but it's deliberately the I will help others succeed. Or you can have the example that I love is you can have two characters who are standing on opposite ends of a field, shouting insults and threats at each other, building power through social actions. And then once they've kind of reached a certain level of power, then they can go out for one major strike. And I think that that's an interesting way of being able to have like a duel. You build power that way. Maybe if the duel is like to first blood, the idea of like first strike wins, then you have to figure out ways to build your power in alternate ways. I really like this. I imagine that initially when I saw this, being able to just say you're rolling an attribute and ability against difficulty 3 instead of a defense could mean that it was just always better to build power using attributes and abilities, but not the case. There are definitely advantages to using combat to build your power as well. Things like overwhelming and the like will make a difference. I'm not going to get too far into it, but combat also now has steps. Once again, steps are back. And the reason why I like steps is because it basically says this is when you can use charms at this particular time, and this is when they have to be declared. So we know that you can use that, but because it says that up here, but again, don't know the charm specifically yet, so that's fine. Two fighters circling each other waiting for the right moment to strike. Yep, because you can just basically say, I'm going to try to isolate where they're weakest. I'm building power that way. I'm going to try to get the crowd on my side, building power that way. No, unofficially steps are never gone, but they're a bit more laid out here. And as far as I can tell, charms hopefully will be referencing steps. So otherwise the standard combat stuff is in here. Characters can use parry or evasion, so that's still there. Soak. Now, the change of soak is defense applies to incoming attack rolls. Soak applies to incoming damage rolls. So soak comes from a character's armor or fortitude. Character not wearing any armor has a natural soak of 1, plus an additional 1 for fortitudes rated 3 or higher. That's totally fine. And then add her armor soak rating to this value to generate total soak. So attacks Specifically, when you make your attack, your soak actually just prevents damage, which is kind of neat. Because you and that works out for me. You know, it means that wearing armor now helps you protect against damage. We'll see how it goes. I'm now definitely skipping over a lot of these things just because we're running lower on time. Hardness now makes a bit more of a difference, because now you have to have an amount of power to beat hardness. But now power is a scale of 1 to 10, I believe. Yeah, the player may grant the extra power to another character, so that's great. Or you can gain anima. Ta-da! Concentrated attacks. So if a character is targeted by multiple withering attacks in the same round, it reduces their hardness. So that doesn't mean their defense goes down, but it does make it easier to land a telling blow on them, which is nice. So yeah, here are some examples of ways that you can build power that don't directly involve attacking somebody. And specifically, the character may accrue power for herself, the character may accrue power or distribute it to her allies, or the character may distribute power to her allies only. So it kind of makes some sense that you can't like talk yourself into attacking somebody, but you can talk somebody else into being able to attack somebody better. You may have noticed that athletics, close combat, and ranged combat do not have unique build power actions, and that's because they're involved with attacking, defending, maneuvering. But there's nothing stopping an enterprising player from stunting a non-attack. So like a trick shot, a display in 1 speed, makes sense. And then decisive attacks work. If the attack misses, you spend a power, but you keep the rest. But otherwise, you spend your power and extra successes. That's new and different. It used to be that it didn't matter about extra successes on your attack roll and any other modifiers. So you roll that dice, you roll those dice, you total up successes, add any bonus successes from weapon damage, and then you subtract the opponent's soak. So useful to know. Gambits are here. Gambits are things like disarming, distracting, ensnaring, knockback. All of those things make a certain amount of sense in that they cost power. So all of that makes a lot of sense. Combat movement makes sense as well. So rushing is there. So then you get to move 1 ranged band towards the target and make an attack with a 3 dice bonus. Interesting. So why would you just not always do that? Yeah. We'll see how that goes. So distance, basic stuff here. I don't see on first glance things like disengage. So that'll be interesting to see. Like how do you prevent somebody from just running away from you all the time? Well, we'll see. I was glanced. It doesn't work if you're already in close range. That's true. But mostly I'm just worried about if you just want to move away from somebody all the time. Gambits. I see. Prevent the target from taking movement actions. Yeah, that makes sense. Pull. All right. I missed that. So good. Thank you, Mungani, for pointing that out. So damage and health. You have less health levels. You have 1, 0, 2 -1, 1 at -2, and 1 at incapacitated. Yikes. Less in terms of health levels that you get to keep. But this game basically says that you can't die unless you want to, which is nice. And that when you go to incapacitated, instead, you can take a dramatic injury. So dramatic injuries can help you with staying up. That's kind of like scars. The versioning error for the health levels? Is it that you have 6 health levels instead of 5? And now lethal and bashing, there's no difference between the two of them, and instead there's just aggravated. So 0 times 2, 1 times -1 times 2, -2 times 2 in cap. So yeah, it's you have 7 health levels. But you heal all your health in a recovery scene, which is kind of interesting. I think this kind of makes some sense. Initially I was like, but I like the ability that you might not be able to keep going and that you'll be hurt for a while, but you can do that with aggravated damage. And also you can just claim that somebody can't take a recovery scene if you want to keep the pressure on. So this is fine. But otherwise, yeah, they heal all their stuff. That makes a certain amount of sense. If the character's under a time crunch, character requires immediate healing or attention. So there's ways to make that work out better. And then there's still your standard environmental hazards, falling, poisons, diseases. And then physique for when you just want to yeet stuff around. Makes a lot of sense. So there's special combat. So now clashes are still there because initially they had to be on the same initiative tick. So when an opponent targets a character with an attack, so when you're being targeted, you can just clash with them right away. It is less bookkeeping to remember your modifiers from health loss. That's true. Setting fire to forests. You're absolutely true, Weirdness. Absolutely right. So now you can just choose a clash action, so you can use it to use up your next action if you want. So this is a way that instead of it being a specific kind of rely on your defense, now you're relying on a crash, or a clash, I should say. Difficult terrain, sure, makes sense. Grappling, so there's now specific grapple rules. I sort of like that there's some emphasis on that because people will always try to grapple. Mounted combats, I'm glancing over this, but mounted combat and naval combat seem like they are really interesting, so they might become more popular among players. So power exchange, some build powers fills an ally's power pool instead. If a character has power in his pool and wants to transfer it to an ally, they can do so as a simple action. So you can give your own power to somebody else, which makes sense. Good night, Kung Fu Fenders. So warfare. So now war is kind of described specifically, dramatic scenes for war. One roll resolution gets made out specifically. So if you're dealing with trivial characters, you just roll once and then you just do it. And that's it. So ventures. Ventures are extended actions. Ventures are where crafting has ended up. It's where bureaucracy has ended up. It's where a lot of this game, a lot of extended things happen. So ventures basically can also be ordinary actions under duress, making changes that involve community, society, and people, complex investigations and research. So when you do this, you determine the prerequisites, so abilities or other traits necessary to attempt the action. Most of the time you do, but like you can say you can't necessarily create an artifact unless you have a certain charm or unless you have a certain ability, which is here. And then obstacles. So maybe if you're trying to create an artifact, the obstacles might be you have to come up with the plans, you have to collect the materials, you have to build your forge, you have to get the forge, you have to actually forge the item, you have to weave the essence into the item, you have to practice with the item, and then finally you've got the item. So these are all things that you kind of have to overcome. And the storyteller sort of figures out what those are, and then you don't have to determine them all at once. The storyteller can determine the next one later. They can come up with a list, but we'll see, because an opponent might find out about something midway through and attempt to interfere, in which case that's another obstacle. The time scale is measured in narrative time, so turn, scene, sessions, and stories, not on game time. So this is perfect because for some people this won't work, and that's fine. But I don't like the idea that somebody's like, well, I want to craft, so I got to spend the next 5 years making this weapon. Well, everybody else is like, but I have things that I want to do. And you're like, nope, I got to craft. So either the crafter doesn't get to do anything because this flow of the game is going too quickly, or everyone else has to like stop and wait. In this way, it's sort of like, okay, well, we recognize that you should probably take 5 or 6 sessions to complete this venture. To me is an easier way to pace it than to be in game time, because then if 7 sessions all take place in the span of one day, you'd be pretty upset because then your crafting goes nowhere. Well, now it does because it's narrative time, which I really appreciate here. Difficulty advantages makes sense. Consequences means failures don't mean nothing happens. It means that you progress as normal, but a consequence comes up. So it could be that it adds another obstacle. It could be that it pisses somebody off. It could be there's any number of things, but it is possible to fail outright for a venture if you fail a maximum number of rolls. So they can rule that there's a maximum number of consequences that you can suffer before something worse happens. All of this makes sense. Ventures, I really like the way that they've put it out there. You can use merits, you can cut corners, you can get help with them, and then they describe a whole lot of different kinds of ventures that you might want to use, like leading an organization, building an artifact, gathering information, research, magical workings, travel. So travel is great. It takes you a long time to get somewhere. You can make that a venture. So instead of it just being like, well, it takes you 2 months to go, well, now you can kind of be like, all right, we have to organize our transportation. You did that. Okay, now we have to bribe our way past the toll takers, et cetera, et cetera. So it's essentially a way to add montages to the game. I really think it's elegant. I like it. And hey, look, because there were so many ventures described, we actually managed to skip a whole lot of text and we got to the end. Ventures actually make up about a quarter of the rules chapters. That's how important ventures are. They give a lot of examples. I like it. So, what do I think about the rules of this game? I think that they are... there's a lot of simplification that we've added here without making the game feel like it doesn't have enough crunch to bite into. I think they've struck a very good balance between making allowing players to make interesting choices and having agency over those choices, and also recognizing that we need to keep the game moving. It excites me. All of this actually excites me quite a bit, and I'm very much looking forward to getting the chance to play it. We'll see how charms affect it, because I think charms will affect this quite a bit, and we'll see how versioning and errata will smooth these rules out, because there's a few bumps here and there, but nothing that I think right now is doing anything but giving me a lot of excitement for this. I really like the idea of Essence. I think that it will be the way to go. Obviously, I'm going to have to try it out. I haven't had that chance yet. You roll up some things, you give it a shot. But right now, look at my use case very specifically. I like to run narrative-heavy games. I like my players to have enough crunch so that they feel like they can make choices with their characters, that they can feel like they can engage with a game and engage with a system. But too much overhead and it becomes difficult because I play sessions in a shorter amount of time and I'm running a game online as an actual play. So I have other things. I have an audience to interact with. I have stream technical things to keep track of, microphones, cameras, all of that stuff. So this might seem like just the thing for me to be able to lessen my cognitive load while still enjoying a setting that I love and being able to bite into crunch. So it does it does feel like this is going to work out quite well. We'll see what happens when we can access the rest of the manuscript and with the errata. And we'll also see what my players say. It's incredibly important, of course, that I don't make unilateral decisions. I know that I want to give this a shot. We're going to give it a test. We're going to find out how it goes. I'm going to hope that we'll be able to talk more about Essence in future clinic hours as well as we go into it. We're definitely not going to review probably every charm. I imagine there's going to be quite a few. But hopefully we'll get a chance to talk about the design process and values that went into this. Heck, maybe we can see if we can get a hold of some guests. It would be really cool. to have a look at this system in more in depth. But look, Exalted is a game that I hold very dear. I love it. I love the setting. I love the rules. And I don't think I'm getting rid of 3rd edition anytime soon. But this might be the game that I need to play right now. It might be coming along at just the right time and give me just what I want. A way to enjoy Exalted with a significant but not overwhelming amount of crunch. So Requiem, what I can say is you can have a look. There is a character sheet that Kate has created using Google Sheets. I think it's pinned in our Discord. I think it was also mentioned in the Exalted Essence channel on the Exalted Discord as well. She's updating it as new rules come in, as more things are discovered. So you can have a look at that. Yeah, there are a bunch of fan sheets out. Official sheets are like the last thing that gets made because they the graphic design of a sheet really makes a difference. Mr. Gun's definitely going to make one. I don't see how that's not going to happen. But there are fan sheets out there, so you can have a look. I do think that they're worth having a look. Kate, look, there's a reason why Kate is super awesome, and some of that reason is that she's just very organized, and it's perfect for dealing with games like this. The concept behind Exalted is a wonderful one, and it is a game that if you really enjoy playing high octane characters in a really interesting and well-realized world that draws from a lot of different sources and a lot of different inspirations, but without appropriating overly on those, I think that it's definitely a game to check out. But it is sometimes a difficult thing to recommend to people who are newer or people who just don't have the time. Essence might be just what we're looking for. We're going to have to see. We don't have all of it yet. But I think I'm looking forward to sinking my teeth into this one. Folks, tomorrow there is no stream coming out for me. So today was supposed to be Scrub Check. It was not Scrub Check. It was Clinic Hours because tomorrow I am unable to stream. I have other exciting things that I have to do that are just more of a personal nature. So we'll deal with it. Thank you, Krister, and thanks, of course, Ian, for showing up as well. Next week is Charm Week, and they're going to be dividing the charms among several different days because there's just so many of them. So we'll have a look at them there. Friday is still going to be punchy, though. So that's Mass Effect being played on Elizabeth A. Neal's channel. On Saturday at 11 a.m., the rewatch for the season finale of Exalted Witch Academy Season 1 is at 11 a.m. right here on this channel. Drew Crew at 3 p.m. on Elizabeth's channel. Then on Sunday, you can join us for our Season 1 Froyo. We're going to look back at the entire campaign so far. We're going to discuss what happened, the events, how we feel personally, how our characters feel. We might play a couple of games, like dating game-esque things or the like. If you've seen a Froyo session before, you've known that we've done. And then we might be able to discuss what we're going to be doing in our season break between now and Season 2. And we may have some news about what we're going to do for Season 2. Can't guarantee it yet. A lot of that just involves us having to sit down and talk about it. But I do know that I'm taking Essence into extremely heavy consideration, and I imagine my players are as well. So, remember always, if you are interested in affecting how we do things here at RPG Clinic, just talk to us, mention it. Best place to do that is also on our Discord. You can leave comments there, suggestions, or you can just talk about role-playing games, or just talk about anything. It's a great community, worth checking out. But if there are things like, oh, I really wish Clinic Hours were on Wednesdays, let us know. We might not be able to accommodate everybody, but we can certainly really listen to what you have to say, because that's the way that we're going to get things better as we go on. Thanks again for people who subscribed or people who gifted subscriptions. It's very kind. It helps keeps us going, especially in these tough times. And hopefully we are crawling out of that soon. But for now, I'm going to go find some dinner because that would be great. I really thank you for all for listening to me yak about this over the course of 2 hours at a very rapid pace. And I will be seeing all of you, hopefully, quite soon.